I'm Kate Miller, Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries at Dandridge First United Methodist Church. Welcome to week 4 of our 16-week study of the Gospel of Mark. Each week, we're reading a new passage from the next chapter of the book of Mark. So let's jump right into the Word. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Before I start talking about this passage, I want to say that it would be very easy to read this and to talk about our storms, the things that make us fearful and the things that rock the boat, so to speak. But today I want to talk about our faith. And I want to talk about what this particular story has to say about the state of our faith and how we react to fear. In this passage, we see Jesus and the disciples. These glimpses of his moments with the disciples are especially important to us today as modern followers of Christ. Reading about how Jesus interacts, what he teaches, how he directs his closest followers and friends helps us to understand how Jesus wants us to act now. In this situation, Jesus and his disciples are in a boat. While they're in the boat, Jesus is taking a little nap. He's just taught all day long by teaching a bunch of parables. And so they get on the boat and he takes a little rest. And I kind of like to picture his sandaled feet propped up on this cushion. But as he's napping, a storm approaches. The disciples are understandably worried. They're on a boat in the water, and wind and waves do not make for steady sailing. They panic, and so they wake the one person they trust the most, Jesus. "Teacher," they say, "don't you care if we drown?" By saying this, they may sound like they don't trust Jesus, but I would caution us to remember that sometimes we do happen to speak out of fear. And it's important for us to remember who we turn to, especially when we're afraid. Often when hardships arise, the reality is that we turn to those we trust most to spill our fears. Perhaps we should be more like the disciples in this. When our worst day appears, we should take our fear to the Savior instead of harboring it within ourselves. Of course, Jesus doesn't leave the lesson there. He calls out the wind and the waves, and they cease immediately. He asks the disciples about their fear, and while it would be easy to read this as Jesus chastising them, I think it's important that we read this with Jesus' very nature in our minds, a Messiah who loves his Father's creation. I think perhaps he asked this question in less of a chastising way and more of a concerned way, as though he's asking, "How's your faith today? How are you growing closer to me, closer to God? How are you handling the intersection of your fear and your faith?" The disciples don't necessarily answer these questions, but the very miracle that Jesus performs in calming the storm, it renews their faith, their amazement at the Messiah. So who is he that he can calm the sea and the storm? The wind and the waves obey him, and so should we. So today I have a few questions for you to consider and pray about. Number 1, when you're feeling fear, do you offer it up to Christ, or do you harbor it inside of yourself? And number 2, if Jesus asked you today about the state of your faith, what would you say? If you're looking to read more this week, I encourage you to read all of the verses leading up to this final passage of Mark chapter 4. Don't forget to follow the church on Facebook so you can hear all of the news and updates that we have, special events coming up, and to join us in person or online for services at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. every Sunday. Have a blessed week, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time when we learn about Mark chapter 5.